Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Today's medicinal plant is probably going to really surprise you. It's ivy. It's not poison ivy, obviously. It's Hedera, or let me see, is that what it's pronounced? Double check that spelling there. Yes, Hedera, Hedera. I was told growing up ivy was poisonous. Don't eat ivy. Don't have anything to do with ivy. Well, it does have some toxicity to it. However, it also has many medicinal uses. And I would say in my grandfather's time, ivy was a very, very popular ornamental plant. I'd say probably from, mid-1800s through mid-1900s. So let's say 1850 to probably even earlier than that. Let's say 1750 to 1950. Ivy was like the go-to. Maybe even to 1970, come to think of it. Different houses I've seen and all. If you had a brick wall, you would grow ivy on it. If you had a brick house, you'd grow ivy at the base of it to climb up the brick to look like the old, English houses. We call it English ivy because it's not necessarily native to England. In fact, there are several different ivies that fall into that same general classification of English ivy. The official English ivy is Hedera helix, but also Hedera hibernica. Now, Hedera hibernica would actually be Irish ivy, but they're also very closely related. There are several Asian ivies. I'm not sure if there's a true American ivy. We have several vines that are similar, of course, like Parnassus or, it'll come to me at some point. Virginia creeper, there you go. Virginia creeper can easily be mistaken for an ivy. It has a similar growth pattern. Now, in our time, it's often considered to be an invasive species. Your European and Asian ivies are considered to be invasive. They really take over. They're not as bad as kudzu, but they can be pretty darn close. Down in Pinehurst, North Carolina, where my aunt has a place, I'll go down, take care of her house, several times a year, or stay there for the winter sometimes, or when we have a hurricane, obviously, and I have no power or water in my house. It's just a second home for her, so I can go in and take care of things, clean up the yard, make sure the house is in good repair, protect her investment, and, it works out well for everybody. The ivy was planted ornamentally, I'm going to say somewhere in the mid-'80s to like 1990, in one corner of the yard by a big old Bradford pear, and also a stand of wisteria on an arbor. I can't honestly say which of those plants has been more problematic. I am terribly allergic to the Bradford pear. That's the ornamental pear tree, has those little I don't even know, not even the size of a cherry. What is that? A grape size, half the size of a grape or cherry size pears. And these white flowers that are very beautiful in the spring, but they smell like fish. I'm very allergic to it. So that's been an issue whenever I've been down there. I am deadly allergic to wisteria. I mean, most of the legume family I do just fine with. I love the beauty of purple wisteria flowers. I love the scent. I mean, one whiff of it, and it just like shuts down my respiratory system and will actually give me hives. I don't know what it is about wisteria. I've gotten a little better with it. Over the years, I've acclimated a little, but the first 2 or 3 times I ran into wisteria in bloom, I was like, I almost had to be hospitalized. I was so sick. But then there's the ivy. The ivy was growing in a patch around the base of the pear tree to start with, and then it grew out, and it grew up trees, and it killed trees, and it just, I mean, it takes over like kudzu. So in our time, we're encouraged, strongly encouraged, by most states in the United States not to grow ivy, as a landscape plant. I guess that would be the best way to put it. You can still buy ivy at any garden center. You can still buy ivy at Lowe's Hardware or Home Depot or your grocery store and grow it in pots. Often you'll see Boston ivy. And I said I wasn't sure if there was a native ivy. Boston ivy probably is. I'd have to double check it. Ivies grow very well, nice trailing plants, but they can take over like crazy. Like crazy. So for that reason, if you're going to use ivy as a medicinal herb, you can probably find a lot of it for free. Just take a little drive or walk or bicycle ride around your neighborhood and see who has ivy growing. If it's growing on a brick wall or it's gotten into the trees, I mean, it will really do a lot of damage to a house. It can get up under siding. I mean, it can really do a lot of damage. It can kill trees. You probably have access to all the ivy you could ever want. So then it comes down to identifying the varieties. And, on this one, most field guides are not going to show you every variety of ivy. You probably would actually be better using a cell phone app to ID ivies. But remember, when you're using a cell phone app, always double check. If you've got a print field guide that has ivies, great, fantastic. If not, go to your state's agricultural website, go to any of the good plant ID websites online, and there are really too many to list, and double check that identification. Now let's talk about ivy. And as I said, there are several varieties, but Hedera, Hedera, they're fairly closely related, and there's not a huge amount of difference between the different varieties. The first one we'll come to is the one that was growing in ancient Greece around Dioscorides' time. He describes it, it's a vine, it's a leafy vine, etc., etc. The root is thin, and he said useless. He said the Roman variety was Hedera pluviatica. I don't know. That's a tough one. Basically, he had one remedy he used it for, and it was for sciatic pain, which is actually really interesting. He said a decoction of the leaves, taken as a drink, is good for sciatica. He also said it was good for jaundice, so I guess I should say he had two remedies, but they were both decoctions. Ivy, it can be somewhat toxic. We're going to get into that more later. It does have a bitterness to it, and you will find it included in some old remedies, especially bitters formulas. St. Hildegard von Bingen wrote of ivy, I guess, around 1100 AD. She said it was like a weed and useless as food for humans, and that is true. I have seen deer grazing on it, but yeah, for humans, we don't eat ivy. We do eat many of the briars that tend to grow in ivy, the smilax, Those are very nice, in fact. Last year, I guess it was probably in March, I was down in Pinehurst again. I have been a lot since the hurricane, so you'll hear me reference to Sandhills in North Carolina quite a bit. One of the first plants to come in the spring was the briars, and there were, I think, 5 varieties I identified growing on my aunt's property. Just common green briar, bull briar, cap briar. There were several briars, and I began harvesting the tender spring leaves, and they were absolutely fantastic. The taste is somewhere between spinach and something a little sweeter and more meaty. I can't quite place yet. I've been trying to think what, almost like a cabbage leaf. Yeah, okay, maybe that's it. We could think about it sort of, and not a very tender cabbage leaf. Okay, so somewhere between spinach and a cabbage leaf, with just a very slight okra type gelatinous quality. I mean, not even pronounced, like you would not even notice it if you weren't eating it absolutely by itself, like in some chicken broth, And then you notice, okay, this does leave like a little mucilaginous, rich flavor on the tongue. Not offensive in any way. It's not slimy. It's actually quite good. I ate briars like crazy last spring, and I hope to again this year. In fact, this year I'm going to look for them everywhere I am, whether I'm in the sandhills, whether I'm in the mountains, whether I'm at the coast. If I see briars in the spring, I'm filling up bags full. They are absolutely delicious, nutritious. They have just a very rich flavor, and but light at the same time. Like you could eat them and eat them and eat them, and not get tired of the flavor, but you would get very full because they're very nutrient dense. They got a lot of fiber to them, but they're not tough. They're just really, really nice. I cannot overemphasize the food value and the medicinal value, and I've done a whole show on that. And we'll get into it again in just a few days. We're going to get into Smilax again because we're working through medicinal vines right now, and I continue to find just tons more medicinal information on Smilax. But it's one of the most common plants. Any yard, any park, any probably vacant lot or national forest or whatever in the United States is going to be covered up in briars. And I don't mean blackberry brambles. I mean vines, with the big, like, ace of diamonds size shaped leaf and the thorns all over it. You need to make sure there are a couple of lookalikes. Only one of them is really toxic, and it's like really not a lookalike at all. I'm thinking Canadian moonseed or moonflower, whatever it is. That's more like a lookalike for wild grapes. Bittersweet could maybe at one point in its development kind of look like briar. Anyway, you're going to want to positively ID the plant, and it's not hard because it's covered in thorns. There are a couple of varieties of hydrangea, 7-bark, that grow in a vine form, but I mean the leaves don't look anything alike. I'm talking that big, ace of spades type leaf, which obviously is not poison ivy. Poison ivy has 3 leaves. These are individual alternating leaves. There is carrion flower, and one other I think has big berries that will grow. That's kind of different. But yeah, this is a fantastic food source. And it has adaptogenic properties. It has immune enhancing qualities. I cannot more highly recommend eating briars. Not the stems, the leaves. No, and the shoots, if there were shoots, you'd probably be okay. But anyway, we're back to what we might think of as English ivy or Boston ivy or, Hedera. St. Hildegard said it was not good as food, but a person who has jaundice should heat it in a small dish with deer tallow or old fat. Why deer tallow? I don't know. She does not explain. Why old fat? Again, I don't know. She doesn't explain. He should place it warm over his stomach so that the jaundice passes into the herb and the yellow appears on the exterior skin of that person. When these herbs have been placed over his stomach, as explained, one should immediately crush watercress in cold water, strain it, and give the drink to him to drink cold. The jaundice will be expelled, and he will be cured. A woman who suffers inordinately great menses at the wrong time should cook ivy in this manner and place it warm around her thighs and navel. Its coldness is contrary to the flow. If the interior membrane, which encloses the intestine, is cut by some accident, ivy and twice as much comfrey should be cooked in good wine, then a bit of the pulverized zedoary, that's basically ginger, or really sand ginger, sugar in equal to the amount of ivy, and some cooked honey should be added to the wine and brought to a moderate boil. This should be poured through a little sack, making a clear drink. The ill person should take this frequently after food at night. He should also place the herbs which were cooked in the wine and place it over the place where the interior membrane was ruptured. This draws together the torn places. He should also cut comfrey root into tiny bits and place them in wine so that it takes their flavor, and he should drink this wine often until he's healed. Okay, St. Hildegard von Bingen, writing in like 1080, 1100. It's a little esoteric for us now. This is actually a really good poultice, and taken internally really does help wounds. Ivy has long been used as a wound herb. Comfrey was known as knit bone because it actually propagates proteins. It actually does stimulate healing, and used internally and externally would definitely help that rupture, that hernia, as we might call it. Honey, of course, is antiseptic, antibiotic. Wine increases circulation. It's going to increase blood flow to the area. The other one was zedoary, which is essentially ginger, or turmeric, galangal, anything in that family would have been pretty much called zedoary at the time. I'm not sure what the point of that was. It does stimulate circulation. It does have antiseptic properties, antibiotic properties. I'm not sure on that, but generally speaking, that's a darn good formula, and would be very helpful, actually. So, going to the English ivy, Gerard wrote, fresh leaves of ivy boiled in wine do heal old ulcers and perfectly cure those that have venomous and malicious qualities joined with them, and are a remedy likewise against burnings and scaldings. So again, used topically, ivy is actually very, very useful. He says, moreover, the leaves boiled in vinegar are good for such who have bad spleens. But the flowers of the fruit are of more force, being very finely beaten and tempered with vinegar, especially so used, they are commended against burnings. Now, where I live, and in my experience, I've lived in 5 states, I've been all around, our ivy doesn't flower. Apparently, the older varieties of English ivy do, and I actually have found some old botanical prints of flowering ivy, but our ivy doesn't flower. He says, the juice drawn down or sniffed up the nose doth especially purge the head, stayeth the running of the ears that have been in long continuance, and healeth old ulcers both in the ears and also in the nostrils. But if it be too sharp, it is mixed with the oil of roses or salad oil. What in the world was salad oil in the 1500s? 1500s, Elizabethan England. It actually was olive oil. They were importing quite a bit of it. Now, some people did make oil from native sunflowers and such, so you can't say for 100% sure, but it often was good olive oil from the Mediterranean. The gum that is found upon the trunk or body of the old stock of ivy killeth nits and lice, and taketh away hair. It'll actually take off your hair. He says, it is of so hot a quality that it doth obscurely burn, as it were a certain waterish liquor contained in those gummy drops. So again, there is a toxicity to ivy. It's not something we can just play around with. It's like what I said about English holly. It has some additional uses, and it could really mess you up otherwise. He quotes Dioscorides and gives a formula where it was the gum mixed with a pomegranate rind and oil of roses used for earaches and toothaches, and the berries would make the hair black. Again, our ivy doesn't hold berries; it doesn't yield berries. So, different varieties have different properties. But even in the 1500s, he says ivy in our time is very seldom used, save the leaves are laid upon ulcers made in the thighs, legs, or other parts of the body, which are called issues, for they draw humorous and waterish substances to those parts and keep them from hot swellings and inflammation. So cooling, reducing swelling poultice, essentially. He also mentions that a decoction, a tea of the berries, could be used as a diuretic to help with kidney issues and excess urine, and that the leaves actually steeped in water and then laid in the eyes while you sleep would help with sore eyes. So that's interesting. It's probably a good use. You could see how if it would calm inflammations and swellings and was good for sores, it would help with sore eyes. So that's a good idea. Again, I don't know if every variety does that, but he's talking the English ivy because he was Gerard of England, a neighbor of William Shakespeare, and the Queen's gardener. Culpeper, about 100 years later, says he's not going to describe it because everybody knows what it is. It's on every house and wall of church and everything made of stone. Yeah, that's pretty much, yep, England and North Carolina at least. But his variety did yield berries, but the flowers would form in July and the berries would be ripe in Christmas. Ours don't have berries. Let's see, he says basically a decoction of the flowers in wine, drunk twice a day, and he specifies red wine, help the lask and bloody fluxes or vaginal discharges. But was an enemy to the nerves of sinews if taken inwardly. He said it was an enemy. It would hurt the nerves and sinews taken internally, but used outward was very helpful as a poultice. That's interesting. He mentions that it was good for jaundice, the berries taken as decoction. But they were actually ivy berries were made into a drink that was supposed to keep people from getting drunk. Oddly enough, I don't know if it was the bitterness and effect on the ulcer or what, but it was said at that time, 1600s England, that it would prevent drunkenness. But it was also good for people with tuberculosis and spit blood. Apparently, the white berries taken inwardly or applied outwardly killed the worms in the belly, and were a singular remedy to prevent the plague. Wow. Also, as a remedy for the plague, if someone had caught it, drinking the berries thereof made into a powder for 2 or 3 days together, taken in wine. They also help break the stone, provoke urine, and women's courses. Fresh leaves of ivy boiled in vinegar and applied warm to the sides of those that are troubled with the spleen or ache or stitch in the side, do give much ease. Wow, that's actually quite interesting. Good for scaldings and burnings. And juice of the berry sniffed up the nose purges the head and brain of the thin rheum that makes defluxions into the eyes. What does that mean? If you have like mucus cloudiness of the eyes, it was thought to help prevent that. I don't know. Very, very interesting, actually. Now, interestingly, there seems to have been a great antipathy, this is quoting again Culpeper, between wine and ivy. For if one hath got a surfeit by drinking of wine, in other words, if you get drunk, the speediest cure is to drink a draught of the same wine, wherein a handful of ivy leaves, being first bruised, have been boiled. I find that fascinating. I would like to know what the action is, what that in boiling ivy leaves in wine takes away drunkenness. If that's true, I don't know. I've never tried it. I probably never will. But it's really quite interesting. I mean, we've seen, several authors who have said something similar to that point at this time. We're talking several hundred years now. Now, Miss Grieve in the 1930s and 40s goes into great detail describing ivy and the different varieties of ivy. And again, she's talking English ivy, which apparently was the berries were a great source of food for thrushes and blackbirds and wood pigeons. So that would be nice. I guess if I ever grow ivy purposefully, I need to get a berry forming ivy, because wood pigeons and I'm talking some good game birds there. It could be a good forage to attract some birds that might be good food. She mentions that ivy was in high esteem among the ancients. Its leaves formed the poet's crown, as well as the wreath of Bacchus. And that's interesting. Bacchus being the god of wine and drunkenness. The wreath, his wreath was made of ivy, and she mentions we are told by old writers that the effects of intoxication by wine are removed if a handful of ivy leaves are bruised and gently boiled in the wine and drunk. My word. Isn't it amazing how all this just kind of always comes full circle? One culture, one century to the next. Greek priests presented a wreath of ivy to newly married persons. It was regarded as an emblem of fidelity. And of course, ivy used to decorate at Christmas time. Roman agricultural writers recommended ivy as cattle feed. Interesting. But she mentions that cows don't much like ivy, but sheep and deer do. And yeah, deer really do seem to like ivy leaves. They pretty much wipe it out. It's just so much. I mean, there's so much interesting lore that she goes over. She says in former days, English taverns bore over their doors the sign of an ivy bush to indicate the excellence of the liquor supplied within, saying that good wine needs no bush. I have no idea what that means. She said by her time in the 30s, ivy really wasn't being used medicinally, which is quite interesting. But she does mention medicinal actions and uses. She says Robinson tells us that a drachm of the flowers decocted in wine restrains dysentery, and that the yellow berries are good for those who spit blood and against the jaundice. She also mentions that sunburn. It was a remedy for sunburn. Smear the face with tender ivy twigs boiled in butter. And that's according to the Old English Leech Book of Bald. Now that's an interesting book. The English Leech Book is one of the oldest herbals outside of ancient Greece, Rome, Egypt, Babylon. It's purely Western European, British Isles. And it's, I guess, probably the oldest. The second would be the physicians of, I don't even know, Mid-Fi. It's Welsh. I can't pronounce Welsh words. I cannot pronounce anything Welsh that I see written. The written word has nothing to do with the spoken word. Welsh is the most infuriating language there is on the face of the earth. But those two are the oldest from the Celtic nations and British Isles, Anglo-Saxon and Pictish and all that. If you love folklore, you're going to love the English Leech Book of Bald. You're going to love the physicians of Mid-Fi or whatever. But as far as useful herbal remedies, there are a few good ones. Let's just say they use a lot of manure in their remedies topically, And if I have a wound, I don't want to really necessarily rub cow poop into it or my own poop, which they used a lot. Probably not hygienic, shall we say. But then again, this was the era before pasteurization and all that, and people had a much stronger constitution. We'll go with that. Otherwise, they may have been a little insane. I don't know. But anyway, let's go to Brother Aloysius. Returning to the German tradition, 1940s or so. He says the leaves have external medicinal use. He did not use it internally. The nauseating sap can be dangerous, and that is true. It can be. The sap of the plant, as we mentioned, can be somewhat caustic, actually. The boiled leaves can be successfully used for ulcers, burns, cuts, skin complaints, and eczema. If the juice extracted from the leaves is smeared on the nose, it destroys polyps and drives any foul smell from the nose. That's actually really interesting. I mean, if you're talking about foul smell on the nose, you're talking about an ulcerated polyp, which has become infected, and if that removes that, that's great. A mixture is also useful in treating running ears. 5 drops dripped into the affected ear every other day. Scurf on the scalp can be cured by washing the scalp twice a day, and a handful of ivy boiled in 2 1/4 cups of white wine. Head lice are also killed by that, scurf being especially eczema of the scalp. Calluses disappear if they are covered with ivy and boiled in vinegar, and the berries act as a purgative. That's actually quite practical. Now, skipping ahead skipping back to the 1860s, Resources of the Southern Fields and Forests says the ivy heterohelix, that's the most common in the United States. It's not native. It's even listed here as an exotic. Covers the walls of brick houses, etc. Successfully used in the South during the late war to restore the color of silk dresses. A strong decoction of the leaves, as I am informed, is employed. It owes this property of imparting luster and freshness to silk, no doubt to the resinous ivy gum which it contains, a principal constituent of which is baccarin. Well, that's interesting. Most people don't know that in the early Americas there was actually a silkworm farming business and silk production industry, I guess we would say, in the region of Charleston, South Carolina. And they were actually very interested in making silk garments and how to preserve it and make it shine, and apparently found out that ivy would work. The silk industry in South Carolina was very short-lived, as was the wine grape industry for which the Huguenots were brought over from France. Within a generation, they had all stopped growing wine grapes and converted to Anglicanism, and that was the end of the Huguenot movement, which is somewhat ironic, actually, if you know the history of the Huguenots. I do have a Huguenot ancestor. Do not agree with any tenet of the Huguenot doctrine, but, most any, some basic points. But yeah, sort of a nutball cult from France, in all honesty. But yeah, they were brought over to start a wine industry that didn't work out so well. King's American Dispensatory of 1898 states the plant is common all over Europe and is cultivated in many parts of the United States, etc., 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 etc. Let's get up to medicinal uses. Bitter substance, alkaloid called heterin. Medicinal actions and uses. The leaves are stimulating and have been employed as an application to issues and have likewise been efficient in diseases of the skin, indolent ulcers, eczema, itch, etc. In the form of decoction applied locally, this will also destroy vermin in the hair and can stain the hair black by application. They are reputed beneficial as a cataplasm in glandular enlargements, basically a poultice take down swelling of glands. Marasmus of children, Pulmonary affections have been benefited by dried leaves and powder. The berries act as an emetic and cathartic, makes you throw up and have diarrhea. They were formerly esteemed in febrile affections for lowering fevers. Basically, when you throw up, your body temperature drops a little bit. So throwing up was one way to help break a fever. Having been supposed to possess sudorific virtues, they would help you sleep, in other words. Associated with vinegar, they were considered used during the London Plague. The gum resin has been used for toothache, ulcerations, local pains, and to control excessive discharges. Now, modern use, plants for future. Ivy is a bitter aromatic herb with a nauseating taste. It is often used in folk herbal remedies, especially in treatment of rheumatism, and as an external application of skin eruptions, swollen tissue, painful joints, burns and suppurations and cuts. Recent research has shown the leaves contain the compound amidine, which is an amoebicidal alkaloid, and also terpene saponins, which are effective against liver flukes, mollusks, internal parasites, and fungal infections. My word. Liver flukes are nasty enough. Imagine mollusks, small clams or mussels in your body. Let's hope that's not what that means. Mollusks. That's what it says. Hey, this is the first I've heard of it. Dang, that would not be nice. Leaves are antibacterial, anti-rheumatic, antiseptic, antispasmodic, astringent, cathartic, diaphoretic, emetic, emmenagogue, stimulant, sudorific, vasoconstrictor, vasodilator, and vermifuge. I think we've covered all those words in recent weeks. I'll just quote Joe Dirt again and say, dang! The plant is used internally in the treatment of gout, rheumatic pain, whooping cough, bronchitis, and as a parasiticide. Some caution is advised of being used internally since the plant is mildly toxic. Excessive dosages destroy red blood cells and cause irritability, diarrhea, and vomiting. This plant should only be used under the supervision of a qualified practitioner, and infusion of the twigs in oil is recommended for the treatment of sunburn. That's cool. I like that use. The leaves are harvested in spring and early summer, and they are used fresh and can also be dried. So, actually, ivy, considered an invasive plant, something you're supposed to eradicate these days. Lots of really, really good uses. Now, here's the interesting thing I will say about ivy. My house in the mountains, it has a lot of ivy on it. It's an old house built in the 40s where they used to grow ivy up to cover the foundations, and, it was supposed to be pretty. Down in Pinehurst, I've dealt with a lot of ivy. On my grandfather's farm, tons of ivy. Where I grew up in the house as a kid, ivy was on everything. I've been around ivy all my life, and I've noticed one specific thing. When you go to cut ivy, work with ivy, pull ivy, whatever you're doing with ivy, it has a very dry texture, and as you move it, something like dust comes off the leaves. That dusty type substance, I am not sure if it is a mite or an insect that lives on the bottom side of the leaf, or if it is a part of the plant, causes rashes and dermatitis. So if you're going to work with ivy, put on gloves, put on a long sleeve shirt. Probably want to put on a face mask. They may be useless for preventing viruses, but they will keep that dust from going up your nose, because you can cause an extreme allergic reaction. And I mean, you start with just a little sneezing and eyes watering, and next thing you know, you basically cannot breathe and may even have to be hospitalized. It can be really nasty stuff to work with. It's great though. I use it all the time. I weave baskets out of ivy. Find the runners, as long as straight as possible. Wait till the fall, early winter, to harvest them, because when they're green, they break easily. Clean them, pull all the leaves off, dry them for a few months, and when you're ready to work with them, give them an overnight soak in hot water, and they're fantastic for baskets. I've woven some wonderful baskets out of ivy, and it's actually one of my favorite. I'd put it second maybe to wisteria. You got to learn to work with the plants, right? I'd put it second to wisteria in terms of materials I prefer to work with when it comes to baskets. You get into like honeysuckle and gelsemium, which we talked about last week. It's much easier to work with. It's much nicer to work with, but it's so much smaller. You have to do so many more weaves just to make an inch of basketry. Ivy's fantastic. If kudzu, ivy, and wisteria are probably my top three when it comes to basket weaving vines. Bittersweet would also be in there, and Virginia creeper. Oh yeah, Virginia creeper's fantastic. So yeah, that's probably like my top 5 basket weaving plants. All right, y'all, have a great week, and I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, for your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.